Very briefly, I am technically the director of the Body-worn camera technical assistance program here at CNA, which means I do whatever Carrie and all the people running this meeting ask me to do and help them out as much as I can. Today, Ollie and I are actually going to kind of tag team on this session and do our best to get the most information out of our two distinguished guests here regarding how they have engaged community in various aspects of body-worn camera implementation. I'll just say a few words and then invite Ollie to chime in. Then we'll have Chief Rosabella and Chief Paul briefly introduce themselves, then we'll get into some questions. I think it's probably pretty clear that we always want to keep community perspectives and community interests in mind when we implement technology like body-worn cameras. I think one of the themes for today is how do we do that beyond the initial implementation of the program? And we think there are other opportunities for community engagement. And so we want to kind of explore that a little bit. I want to invite Ollie as a co-facilitator here to bring his perspective as a TTA lead and as a leader in the Camden Police Department when they were implementing body-worn cameras. So Ollie, you have full right to respond to the questions that you're asking if you'd like.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. My name's Orlando Clavis. Please, some people feel free to call me Ollie. I spent 27 years in the city of Camden, where I left as the assistant chief. One of the bigger projects I had, in addition to helping stand up the organization, a new organization in Camden, one of the tasks I had was to implement a body-worn camera project. And fortunately for me, although I didn't appreciate it as much, we had help from folks like CNA and some other folks who helped us implement our body camera project and some other projects. But it was really the partnership and the assistance that I think that helped with the finer points of what our project were, and they propelled us much further than we would have been had we not received that help. So now I'm with CNA as a TTA lead, but come to you as a person who's been the full beneficiary of these types of resources. And at first I was skeptical, but I became a believer, and that's why I believe in this project so much, is because I see what it affords police agencies, particularly leaders who are strapped with so many other tasks, and then you throw body cameras on top of it. Technology is just one more thing to wrangle. So I feel I have a perspective of that hopefully you folks can relate to. Thank you, Chip.
Thank you very much. Let's move quickly, if our panelists wouldn't mind introducing themselves and their agencies a little bit. Chief Paul, let's start with you.
Chief Murphy Paul, Baton Rouge Police Department. We have around 700 sworn police officers, exactly 698, 200 non-sworn police officers. Capital city, a city of Baton Rouge, a population around 220 to 230,000 residents here. Of course, that number grows up to about close to 500,000 people on any given day. And we have around 88 square miles of coverage.
Thanks, Chief. Can you say just a word about where you're at with implementation of cameras? Have you had them for several years? Or are you just getting off the ground?
Sure. No. So we actually started a pilot program back in 2016, looking at body cameras here in the city of Baton Rouge. We were fortunate to receive a grant through BJA for the implementation. That grant lasted from 2017 to 2019, the implementation. We went live in late 2017 with full implementation for all of our police officers here in the city of Baton Rouge. But we got a lot of buy-in from early on from our elected officials. City Council was very active and engaged in the implementation, the review, narrowed it down to what company we were going to go with. So we've been active since 2017 with our body-worn camera program.
Very good. Thank you so much. And Chief Rosabella, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
How you doing? I'm Chief Rosabella, Portchester Police Department. Not quite as big as Baton Rouge. We're 62 officers in 2.3 square miles. The unique thing about Portchester is that to our north is Greenwich, Connecticut. They have a median income of $312,000. To our south is Rye, New York. They're $310,000. In Portchester, we are $74,000. So we're considered a poor community by Northeast standards, especially being surrounded by the two of the wealthiest neighbors in the country. Right now, our cameras are due to go live sometime in October.
Very good. Thank you both. I'm going to launch into the questions now, and I just want to make a note about the format here. We have several questions that we'd like to pose to both of our chiefs here. related to, obviously, community engagement and body cameras. Ollie and I will kind of tag team on this and go back and forth. As we do that, either of you chiefs, if there's something you want to interject or something that you think it's important that we be talking about, please feel free to, speak from your perspective and your experience. And as you've heard, those of you who are participants in the audience, if questions or thoughts come up, please put them in the chat. If they're pertinent to the point, we'll get to them right away, or we may wait, till the end of the session and have a little bit of Q&A. But either way, we want to hear everyone's perspectives. And again, Ollie, you're invited to participate as a respondent as well in all this. But I'll get us started off. And I think maybe Chief Rosabella, I'll start with you. Can you describe how your department engaged community members and representatives in the body-worn camera development and implementation process at the beginning? Or how you're planning to, I guess, at this point?
Okay, well, it's a little background to it. I took over as chief in 2020. Captain and I were promoted at the same time. And our biggest thing was we have to reach out to the community. So we approached all the major stakeholders, community leaders, and we sat down with them for a series of meetings. And during those meetings, they kept on bringing up body cameras. And we had told them, look, we tried this 4 or 5 years ago, and our city government or town government had no appetite for the expense. But we had said to them, put pressure on them and see what happens. But fast forward a few months, we had George Floyd, and then the governor of New York came up with the police reimagining program. So during that, from that group of community leaders, we had asked for volunteers to rewrite our policy and procedure manual, or to review and rewrite. So out of that group of about 30 people, we got about 11 volunteers. They consisted of a defense attorney, a district attorney, our local president of the local chapter of the NAACP, a mental health worker, a couple pastors, a priest, and members of the police union. And we sat down, and including the entire policy, one of the things we wrote was the body camera policy. And the idea behind it was this small group of 11, you're going to go back to the 30, and they're going to go back to their community and get feedback. It was a couple-month process, and some of the things that they had wanted, we took. Other things that they wanted, we didn't take. We explained why. But at the end of the day, I think everybody was happy with the final product.
That's impressive, actually. Thank you. Chief Paul, can you address that question?
Sure. We were fortunate to work with some of the SMEs that were provided by Bureau of Justice Assistance. And the first thing was coming up with those 4 goals. And the 4 goals were to develop goals and policies and procedures that were informed by evidence-based practices and were going to be embraced both internally and externally. Other was to develop and implement effective training protocols that support the tenets of the policing tactics. The other one was to implement a program that was going to be supportive and that support the civil rights of all of our community members and promote officer safety as well. And the other one was to improve community relations by decreasing use of force. So once we identified those 4 goals, and we included the mayor was very active involved, our city council was involved. The beauty with that implementation program and working with the experts was actually the creation of a website. We developed a website, which also included online surveys, talked about our body camera program, a lot of education and awareness with the community. And we were also fortunate because our community leaders were pushing for this as well, the members of the community, as well as our elected officials.
All right. Thank you both. I'm going to actually kind of dig into this topic a little deeper, if I might, for a few minutes. And again, ask both of you a couple questions. I'd like to ask, number one, would you describe your department's approach in this as being proactive? And if so, how did you do the outreach that was necessary to get the engagement? Maybe Chief Paul, I'll stick with you and then go back to Chief Rosabella.
Yeah, getting that buy-in at the top was early. I think there was a united desire for leadership within the parish government as well as the city to move forward with this initiative. So I think that was critical. We were on the heels of a very high-profile incident. There was a shooting of a resident where an officer was ultimately terminated. That particular incident got a lot of national headlines. So when we created the website, online surveys, getting community input, I think that was really important in those early stages. When I came in 2018, we looked at some of those community leaders who were the most vocal, who had a least favorable opinion of the Baton Rouge Police Department based on past issues. And we brought him on our team and we made him part of our Chief Advisory Council. So we would use our Chief Advisory Council, which had members from the community, our higher education institution, leaders, a very diverse group of community members and organizations, and we engage them in the process. We meet quarterly, we go over policies, those community conversations, specifically about body camera use and the program actually turning from community conversations to recommendations to our policy review committee to actual changes in policies that really didn't impact negatively officer safety, but actually improved our relationship with the community. So that's something we've been very fortunate to do. And we have a lot of examples and some of the changes that were made from those conversations. So really getting the community involved, making sure that we put things on our website as it relates to how the program was progressing.
That's good, Chief. You're anticipating my next question, but let me get to Chief Rosabella and just ask that same question. How proactive do you think you had to be in all this?
Well, we were very proactive. You know, we had immediately started reaching out to the community and wanting their input. You know, like Chief Paul said, that the people who were most critical of us were the ones that we were looking for. You know, like the book, Abraham Lincoln, Team of Rivals, how he got everybody in that was against him during the election. That's sort of what we did. The people that had the most negative opinion of us, those were the ones that we wanted. We wanted to hear why their opinion of us was so low, you know, what their issues were. We engaged them. You know, we legitimately took what they had to say. You know, we made changes. And, you know, the first few times they looked at us like we were nuts. Like, you know, you're not going to do this as all lip service. We slowly won them over. We got to where we are today, which I think is a very good policy for cameras. We have very good relations with the community. I think that early engagement was very important. And to reaching out to the people who were our biggest fans.
Yeah, good for you. And thanks for mentioning Team of Rivals, one of my favorite books. But Chief, you mentioned something that I want to come back to now again. Can you think of any specific concerns or recommendations that the community members brought that you responded to? Not necessarily asking them for their input, but what did they bring to you that you felt you responded to directly?
Sure, good question. So when we created the Chief Advisory Council, you know, the goal was they can help us because we know that a lot of education awareness is important in our perceptions and helping them with our messaging. So some of the things that came out of those community conversations and some of the online surveys, we increased the number of supervisory audits. I believe DOJ, when we first set up, it was one audit per quarter. We increased that to 3. So that actually came out of a community conversation. The other one was looking at patterns of behavior. You know, one thing now, when you look at our policy, particularly in internal affairs, use of force, certain type of conduct, we do a 6-month audit. So we go back and the IA investigator is required to do a 6-month audit to see if we have patterns of behavior, to determine if there's something we missing from a training standpoint. So that is now standard. That actually came out of those community conversations. One big one was K-9 officers. You know, when we came in, our K-9 officers were not required to turn on their body camera. In fact, they can turn it off before the deployment. And the reason behind that, according to my staff, was because we didn't want to reveal any techniques or tactics as it relates to the deployment. So we looked at best practices, and I had heart-to-heart conversations with my team. And the change was, we're going to still record it. They have to use it just like everyone else. We would just redact those parts of the video that will compromise officer safety. That actually came about from having conversations with the community. And let me tell you what that policy did. When we changed it in 2019, 67.5% decrease in total bites, okay, involving K-9 officers in that time period. There was a very, very critical article that was printed against us as it relates to our use of K-9 officers on juveniles. When we changed that policy, we had an 83.3% decrease in juvenile K-9 bites compared to the same time period last year. So those conversations changing the policy that really gave us some numbers to really improve community police relations, and to show them that we're listening and we can still make those policy changes without compromising officer safety.
Good. I love it when chiefs talk like analysts and cite those statistics. Appreciate that. Chief Rosabella, anything you want to respond to on that point?
You know, the main concern with the community with our program, and again, our program's not up and running yet. It should be out in October. But their main concern was transparency, and they wanted to know that videos would be available to the public. Most importantly, would be like a critical incident. Developing our policy, you know, we think we took care of their concerns. They were happy with the final outcome about releasing video, critical incident videos, and just run of the mill, just regular incidents and privacy issues. They were concerned with privacy issues as well. When we wrote the policy with them, we took care to make sure that their concerns were addressed.
Great. Already warming up to the way you both are responding to these questions. I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Ali for a minute. Ali, if you want to respond to any of those questions from your experience, either with Camden or as a TTA lead, please feel free to, and then we'll go to the next question with you.
In the city of Camden, we had started our body camera project around 2015. And quite frankly, you know, we had so much going on that it just seemed like one more task that didn't have time for it. But I'm glad that we worked with the partner agency to kind of help us identify the need to work with the community. So we were trying to build our relationship with the community, realizing that it had so much benefit towards crime solving. You know, we started community surveys in the different areas because they were so different to try to increase participation. We held a series of meetings and then we just sought input. So I think that was a good process. It echoes kind of what the two chiefs kind of discussed, and the time that we had expended in doing that. I think what happened, and I think Chief Rosabella brought up, encouraging the folks who were probably the most negative to participate. It was so helpful because it drew out kind of what their issues were. And sometimes their issues went, a little bit further than the actual topic. So it lended itself to further opportunities. So, the group that we had originally put together for the sake of body cameras and issues surrounding body cameras, that morphed into community group of, kind of unto itself, right? So every time that we had opportunity to discuss issues, we were connecting with these folks and bringing in new people. And then there were, quite frankly, there were one or two people that I think to this day, I probably still can't win them over. But what it did for us, I think it gave us the ability to say, well, we thank you for your input, but this policy was ultimately created with the input of all community members or a robust group of community members. So it led, I think that provides some comfort to most folks, knowing that although one or two didn't necessarily agree, we had support from a lot of people, and that our policy reflected the will of the greater group, which is, certainly a democratic process. So I think that was a tremendous takeaway. And I'm so happy today that we engaged in that process. And it seemed like a huge task, but I'm glad that we spent the time doing that. If we can lead into the next question for the panelists, is there, clearly you folks have had some good community interaction with regards to your body cameras. But can you talk a little bit about, is this ongoing today and what that looks like, if that's the case? Has it morphed or is it continuing? Chief Rosabella, I know in your situation, you have this requirement, this law, that 203, that requires every local government to have a police reform plan. But can you tell us how, what that looks like? And I ask Chief Rosabella and then Chief Paul to respond, please.
The reform plan was sent up to Albany. That was all completed. Per the law, that was what was required, and we were technically done. We satisfied that. But we've continued to meet with our committee on policy. We call it our policy review committee. We continue to meet with them every few months just to go over some changes or just to touch base and say hi. The larger meetings, we've been having town hall meetings now. We've expanded it to anybody in the community. We've done 3 or 4 of those so far. Those are like kind of open to whatever they want to talk about, but specifically to our body-worn camera program. The plan is to meet with them probably in September again before our official launch, and just go over any concerns they may have or anything they want to discuss before the program is put out to before the cameras are put out to the officers.
Thank you. Chief Paul?
Yes, sir. Every time, unfortunately, we live in a time now, obviously, where, law enforcement, the spotlight is on us. So every quarterly meeting, there's conversations about some incident, right? Whether it's something trending on social media, or use it for. So we're always engaging in our chief advisory council on that. But also everywhere I go, and my senior staff, we speak at a lot of community events. And everywhere I go, I have that body camera with me. Unfortunately, I had an incident where I needed it, and I'm glad I had it on. But we're always having these conversations about body camera, getting the public to trust and believe in it. One of the things we see with the community engagement, if I can be very specific about policy, unfortunately, you can have one incident that happens on social media, and how that incident trend could be the difference between potential civil unrest in your community, between the community looking at an incident. And, when we get those type of incidents, we address it immediately because we know that the body camera provides a different perspective. And I can tell you, I have given private viewings to complainants, and I am telling you that using that body camera to engage the community early on, using my chief advisory council to help me in my messaging about information. Sometimes there's video that may be trending on social media that doesn't tell the whole story. And when we're trying to continue to build trust, and I'm able to sit down and have a conversation with someone who's involved in the complaint, because sometimes you'll see it may be someone who has absolutely nothing to do with the complaint itself that's causing something to trend on social media. So when you bring the family in, when you bring the person in, you have a heart-to-heart conversation about where we are, how we've grown, and how I want them on my side. And I can tell you, those private viewings have turned into press conferences where I have the family member standing on side by side with me at press conferences, telling the truth about an incident involving one of my officers.
Thank you. Can I ask you folks to say in order, has your group changed, right? Your community group, and realizing that the groups can be so eclectic and they can change. And sometimes we don't think of other law enforcement agencies or perhaps hospitals, EMS, fire, all those those folks that we need to work with. Has that changed in your group? And if so, could you tell us how? Very briefly, I could tell you that working with this project, we hear about different agencies that are sometimes left out of the loop. University police departments that sometimes work around a city or vice versa. Sometimes the hospital staff not aware that officers are wearing body cameras, so there's a little bit of conflict. So can you just talk about that a little bit, and we'll stay with you, Chief Paul?
One of the things I did in 2000, I believe it was 2018, and I created a critical incident, public release of critical incident recordings. All right. We started that in 2018. I think at the time, we were probably one of the only agencies in the state that did it. I thought that was important. So we identified who those interested parties are. The interested parties are the district attorney's office, my internal affairs, my legal team, any other law enforcement agency that is involved in the incident. Then they too are part of that interested party. And also our federal partners. If we believe that there's a potential federal nexus, I like to bring our federal partners in early on. So we created that policy in 2018. We put it online. Our body camera policy is online. So that's really helped us. But as it relates to reviewing the body footage of a critical incident, it would only be an interested party that would view that.
Thank you. Chief Rosabella, have you had any evolution of your community, the scope of your community, hospital staff, doctors and nurses, fire, EMS, anything like that?
Well, again, we haven't rolled it out, so no. But our plan is to do a media campaign before the cameras go into effect, letting the community know that we have them. And like Chief Paul said, we have all our policies and procedures online. So anybody at any time could go on our village website and look at our policy procedure manual. So if they do go online, they're going to see our body worn camera program policy. The short answer is no. The long answer is we plan on doing a media blitz, so to speak, Facebook, Twitter, our local newspapers, that the cameras are going online. If anyone has any comments, concerns, that they can always reach out to us.
If I can add to that on a community members piece, because I think it's very important. Since I've been in office since 2018, and I sat down with my team about where law enforcement was going, and this is a personal thing that we started. I will never, ever release any critical incident evidence, body camera, or anything related to any incident without having a meeting with the family members of those affected by it. The last thing I wanted was for them to see it on the news. And I've extended that courtesy to any person who's involved in an incident before it's aired on social media, before it's aired by our news outlet because we received a public records request. I sit the family members down and let them see it in my office first.
Thank you, Chief. That's a great point. And I certainly appreciated Lori McElroy's session yesterday, which touched on a lot of those issues. So thank you. Chip, how about going back to you for the next question?
Sure. And I think both of our chiefs have probably anticipated this question as well, but let me offer it. I'm interested in the extent to which community members play a role in reviewing critical incidents. Chief Paul, I think this goes beyond, the courtesy of showing family members, but I've seen jurisdictions where civilians play a role in reviewing the incidents and have a voice in the agency response, whether there's any discipline for the officer. So I'm asking if there is any more formal ways in which community members might be involved in reviewing body-worn camera footage related to critical incidents. Start with you again, Chief Paul, and see where we go with this.
Now, I've opened that up to family members, obviously complainants. Those I'll let them know that they can bring community members with them. Most of these incidents are going to meet the definition of our public records request, so we would have to obviously produce them at some time. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when we have interested parties, I don't just release it. I consult with the parish attorney's office, district attorney's office, all other law enforcement officers that are involved, are considered interested parties. But no, we don't just release it overall to specific people in the community unless they're directly involved in the family member or the complainant would like them there. But I can tell you, I have had engaged my chief advisory council in providing them information specifically on messaging because they are my partners now. And they help me keep peace and to put out some truth as it relates to some incidents. And they're helping me with the messaging on incidents to prevent civil unrest.
Thank you, sir. Chief Rosabella, how do you respond to this question?
We don't have any intention of just having anybody come in to view the video. Critical incidents, of course, people that are affected by it will be invited in to review it before it's released. Anything past that would be through, a FOIL request.
Okay, Ali, I'm going to toss this back to you for a minute. Just if you have any experience with your sites on this point.
Yeah, so by and large, that's not the situation, but I think it presents a very interesting notion that Chief Paul started talking about, in order to get help with responding to a community-wide incident. I could certainly see the application of having situations where you would want community activists and those other folks who are going out in the community to help you to perhaps have perspective. So it even gives me, some pause to think about ways in which we can incorporate them, because there were times where I know that we've had to do that to give that context to community members, but formalizing that in policy and practice, I think it's certainly a great topic. I think to tease out, start to discuss. I know there are obviously civilian review panels, folks who operate in that capacity, working with Newark Police Department. They know they have some level of interaction from other folks who reviewed footage, but that was typically done in the from the perspective of meeting specific requirements that they had to respond to. So I think it's a great topic actually to kind of tease out and to formalize for agencies, and certainly one to consider in policy that probably isn't considered by most.
All right, appreciate your indulging me, all of you, on that question. Ali, I'm going to toss this back to you for our next question.
Gentlemen, are there any ongoing barriers to effective community engagement with your body camera project? And if so, could you please tell us what's worked for you? We'll start with Chief Rosabella.
I don't have much to add on this one since our cameras aren't yet deployed. So, I would defer to Chief Paul to answer that one. Sorry.
Yeah, probably. So one of the challenges that I'm seeing, like this, social media has been a catalyst of so many challenges that we are faced with right now. So it's two barriers that I've seen. One is to try to immediately address these issues early on. The more you let them out there in the social media world, the worse that they can become. And I understand as a leader, we have to exercise reasonable care in these situations, right? Obviously, we want to prevent civil unrest. We want to get the facts and truth. So having those credible messengers who are community leaders who trust that when I pick up the phone and say, hey, look, I reviewed that body camera and what's being pushed out there is not the truth. Respect the process give me an opportunity to do my job, but help me with the messaging piece, right? I think that piece will always be a challenge for law enforcement leaders in the current state that we're in. One of the barriers has been internally and morale. You know, when you start talking about releasing video footage early, and look, let's just be honest, in most of these cases, it benefits the police officer. Most of our officers out there doing the right thing and are responding to the training. However, you still get pushback from our union, from some who not embracing the ever-changing environment that we're working in. And I can tell you that has become kind of a barrier when you bring a family in to look at a video where police can see like you're taking their side or that you're not, taking the officer's side. So weighing that with my team and knowing how we can get the union to support us and meet some common ground and understanding the bigger picture on why we release critical evidence is not to hurt us as an agency, but it's really to help us in to build those relationships. So that has been a challenge internally from a morale standpoint, getting the union leadership and others to understand that this is better for us as a profession when it comes to accountability and transparency.
Thank you, Chad. That was an excellent point. I heard that, you're echoing what was mentioned yesterday. I heard on one session, they discussing, the degree to which we discuss this internally once we know we're going to release body camera footage, perhaps with the officers, so they can prepare their families and things like that. So I think it's a great point. When I considered this question, what came to my mind was, our situation in New Jersey. Several years ago, there was essentially a directive, which is binding in our state by the Attorney General, which essentially says that with regards to critical incidents and officer-involved shootings, police chiefs and departments are not able to speak to that because now the investigation shifts completely to the prosecutor or the state attorney general's office. So certainly, that can be a barrier for a chief who's expected to respond to his community. At least fair to say, the community wants to hear he or she say something about the incident and give their opinion, and particularly if it's controversial. So do you have anything like that that impedes you, or anything you identified, and if so, can talk about how you intend to handle it or how you have handled it, meeting with those folks involved, making them another stakeholder group or anything like that? Chief Paul, could you respond to that, please?
Yeah, when I created that policy in 2018, obviously that was something new. That was not our practice. I think it was the New Orleans Police Department was the only agency that I saw that had a similar type policy on releasing evidence early. I can tell you when you talk to the interested parties that are involved, that's the DA, other agencies, everybody may not necessarily have agreed with that policy change. But for me as a leader, I had to take into account the situation that we were in at that time. At the end of the day, it's about public safety. And when I sit down and there's a process that we go through before I make a decision to release video evidence early, and I listen and I hear their arguments. And I can tell you, just because we've never done it before is not the right response for me. It's where we're going as an agency. Is it going to compromise our integrity of our investigation? Is it going to prevent civil unrest? Is it going to prevent, and I look at all of those things. So we didn't always agree with it, but I think that having honest conversations, because there's some that I did not, because I think they presented a pretty valid argument on why I should not. And that's when I rely on those messengers, even though I believe based on what I knew that officer would probably have been justified based on preliminary findings that I were briefed on by my investigators. But every case is unique. Sometimes the culture where we're at, I can tell you after George Floyd, our response is different to a lot of things, because that incident that everybody saw, and that incident, which has now created policy changes and reform all across America, and some of it is forced. Some leaders may not necessarily have agreed with some of the changes, but laws were changed at the state and local level. And we have to embrace those changes. Now, some of them was a knee-jerk reaction. That's a conversation for another day. That the whole defunding police was a bad movement and should never have been presented in communities all across America. But what I will say that when we engage the community and we listen, and we engage them in the process, we're not always the smartest ones in the room. And some of their recommendation and some of their ideas make sense. And it's okay to listen to them. It's okay to develop those relationships and say, look, I can't release it right now. And let me explain to you why. But please believe that there's going to be a fair investigation. It's going to be an impartial investigation. We're going to find out the truth, and we will release those findings at the appropriate time. So I have not always agreed with my partners, but I have to do what I think is in the best interest of the men and women in this community.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Rosabella, obviously you're waiting to get your cameras, but with regards to footage and releasing them, do you anticipate any barriers? Is there any legal requirements or things like that would forbid you to, communicating or anything of that nature?
I think the biggest issue is going to be dealing with the union and the individual officers involved. During this whole process, the union was involved. We polled the officers. We asked for their input on what they thought a body camera policy should look like, what should be in there, what should not be in there. Union leaders were called in to sit down individually. We spoke with them regarding one of the main things that we spoke to them about was the release of footage. And I think we're all on the same page, but when the time comes for that first incident to be released, I'm sure there's going to be pushback. But going into it, we all seem to agree that it's necessary for these critical incidents to be put out there as soon as possible, so we control the narrative and not, some 5-second or 10-second cell phone clip that's going to be posted on Facebook. So, but we'll see how it goes once that first incident does happen.
Now, if I recall correctly, your labor union is part of your police reform committee. Is that correct?
We did. We had one officer and union president was part of that 30-person committee. So, I thought it was a good move to have the union represented. If for anything else, they can go back to the membership and they were able to say, this is what the people are thinking and why. And, at the end of the day, it worked out well. There was no negative feedback about our plan that was submitted to the government, to Albany.
Thank you, Chief. Chip, I'll ship it back to you.
All right, as we wind down here, I'm going to go slightly off script for a second because this conversation has really intrigued me. And I want to say this, I ended the day yesterday by talking about transparency as the watchword of the day. I still believe that's true, and I believe we've heard it several times today. But comments that we've heard is that it's complicated. And day by day, incident by incident, stakeholder by stakeholder, the impact of transparency is actually pretty significant and pretty big. And I want to thank our chiefs for the way they have leaned into this topic and opened up their experiences. I think it's very, very important to hear about these things and hear about these experiences and how you respond, to what's presented to you. So I just want to thank you both for that. Ollie, I want to thank you too. We do have a couple minutes if anybody would like to ask a question or even make a comment on your experience with these issues in the chat. Please go ahead and do so. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions.
If I may say something, James,
Yeah.
on one of the effective community engagement piece, I've had, and I can think of 2 incidents that come to mind that I had to make a very hard decision on recently. And it was 2 police officers within the past year who made a mistake, made a bad decision, made a mistake. They went through that administrative process, and my team and I believe that they could still effectively do their job. It was just a good police officer who made a bad mistake that day. Both of these incidents were very high-profile incidents. In fact, many people thought they should be fired. I did not fire these officers. And for me, trying to communicate to a community, even those who say, okay, we like the progress we're going, how can I say, look, this is a good officer who made a mistake that day, but he can still do his job. He's still a great public servant. And I'm telling you, body cameras have been a game changer in that, because those body cameras showed him doing the right thing 97% of the time. And in those few times when he was going through something in his life that was bleeding over into his professional life, he made a few mistakes. But to sit down with community leaders, sit down with my chief advisory council and say, look, we put him through our early warning system. We had supervisors watching his body camera every single day for a certain amount of time. And I am telling you that the behavior that you saw that day when he made that mistake is not the guy who he is. So we've actually been using that as a way to promote officers on the job who, made a mistake, but can still effectively do their job. So it's a tool that you can use in your early warning programs. And I'm telling you, that has really worked out for me as a communicator to the public on why that officer can still wear that badge.
Thank you for that, Chief. Again, thank you both for your presence here today and for your openness and for just being willing to share what your thoughts and experiences are. I think we're at the end of the session. And so, Carrie, are there instructions for where to go next?
Yeah, Chip, and there was just one question,
Oh.
if we have time for it real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
The question was just, can the chiefs share the policies that they developed with this community engagement process? So I did post Baton Rouge Police Department's body worn camera policy in the chat, and I know Chief Rosabella, you noted yours will be posted eventually, but that's something you'd like to share with the participants, we can go ahead and post that in Hoova if it's available. If you're still working on it, then we can converse later about whether you'd like to share that. But that was the only question we received in the chat.
Yeah, if you just tell me how to get it over to you, that would be fine. We have no problem sharing it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.